Good morning to you all, and a very warm welcome to Shabbat at the House. My name is Natalie Kendel, and I will be your host for today. In case you're new to our group, the House is a house church. We often get together on Saturdays for what is called Shabbat at the House, during which we celebrate Sabbath together. Here's a bit of what you can expect from your time together with us this morning. We will be sharing some music and singing. We'll be talking with God, and we'll explore a story found in Genesis chapter 32. First off, just a few bits of information for you. Please feel free to subscribe to this, our official YouTube channel. Here we stream live and upload recordings for you to enjoy in your own time. And we post what events are happening and when on our social media platforms. So if you want to be alerted to future events, you can find us on Facebook and on Instagram. We are a nonprofit, so we deeply appreciate the support given to us by our patrons on Patreon and those who donate to us on PayPal. A very special thank you today to our patrons, Shairon, Naomi, Christina, Aid, and bootsybug. People like you are helping us do everything from research to media creation, music recordings, and so much more. And even when you share our content online, you're helping support us there too. So thank you so much. And most importantly, thank you for being here. Next up in our info bits, if you're interested in free audiobooks to listen to, then Read Aloud Corner might be something for you. At Read Aloud Corner, we pick really good books, and they are made available as audiobooks on YouTube. For example, in the past, I've read through the Chronicles of Narnia series, the Space Trilogy by C.S. Lewis, and the Adventurous Tales of Robin Hood. Click the link below to discover the full playlist and to be alerted to future uploads. Sometimes at the house, you may know that we make recommendations, good books, YouTubers, content makers that are worth going and checking out. Our recommendation today is of an Instagram account called Black Liturgies. The wisdom, insight, and absolute beauty of this account's posts is truly astonishing. The creator, Cole Arthur Riley, expresses thoughts and experiences in the form of prayers and meditations. The texts often feel like a marriage between thoughts on social justice and poetry. Definitely worth having a look at that account and giving her a follow. And lastly, for the information bits today, in case you've missed it, the house is hosting an extra special event this coming Monday, the 31st of October. The 31st is Reformation Day, and in celebration of the bravery and legacy of the Reformation, we'll be looking at the life of Martin Luther and asking why a reform that happened in the Middle Ages can possibly still matter or impact us today. This event will start at 7 p.m. Central European Time, and we'll be sharing an evening together of storytelling and music. Please feel free to bring snacks, wrap yourself in blankets if you're in the corner of the world like us where it's cold, and we look forward to spending this Reformation Day celebration with you. That's it for the information part. Let's sing together Joy to the World, and then we'll jump straight into our story for the day.
Let every heart Jesus, he rules with truth and grace. By faithfulness he proves the beauty of his righteousness and wonders of his love, and wonders of his love, and wonders of his love.
Do you know the meaning of your name? Is there a story behind why you were given that name? Perhaps you inherited it from your grandfather, or perhaps your mother named you after her favorite food. There are different views as to how much a name actually matters. It certainly seems to matter a lot to soon-to-be parents as they hunt through baby name books looking for just the right name. Some turn quite creative in naming their children. Many celebrities today seem to be in competition with each other about who can come up with the most obscure or unique name. And so you have children today named everything from North to Big Mac to Pilot Inspector. One might feel a bit sorry for some of these children as they grow older and enter the unforgiving hunting ground of school peers. But whether you've thought about it or not, when we meet another person for the first time, the first way we'll usually identify ourselves is by giving our name. Well, one thing is for certain. In the days of Isaac, names were very important things. Names meant something. Each name had a story behind it, and often names were considered closely linked to one's identity, whether it was the identity your parents wished for you to have, or an identity others prescribed to you. Isaac had a story about his name. No doubt he would have been told that story many, many times by his father Abraham and his mother Sarah. Isaac, the name that means laughter, or he who laughs, inspired by the time his mother laughed at the mere suggestion that she would have her first child at the youthful age of 90. Isaac, the name of the miraculous child, the impossible child, so impossible it made you laugh. Well, the man named Isaac goes on to marry a woman named Rebekah, and history seems to repeat itself when she, like Isaac's mother, remains childless. In Genesis chapter 25, Isaac prays to God on his wife's behalf, and God answers his prayer. Rebekah becomes pregnant. And in reading this story, we can't help but wonder, what will this child's name be? However, we discover soon that Rebekah isn't having one child, but two. And before they are even born, the text says that the children fought within her inside her womb. The time comes for Rebekah to give birth to twin boys. The first comes out red, his body covered in hair, and so they name him Esau, meaning in Hebrew done or already made. Here was a baby already cooked or done, so to speak, as he came out covered in hair. Apt name. The second boy emerges grabbing onto his brother's heel, and so he is given the name Jacob. Jacob, which comes either from the Hebrew root keb, which means to follow, to be behind, but also to supplant, circumvent, assail, or overreach, or from the word for heel, akeb. And so Harry and the heel grasper are born and given each their name. Some of us will have heard the story of Jacob and Esau before, but just to make sure we're all on the same page as we move through this story. When Jacob is an adult, prompted by his mother, he dresses up as Esau and tricks his father into giving him the blessing and birthright belonging to the eldest son, belonging to Esau. Jacob tries to trick his way into a blessing. He was able to successfully fool his father Isaac because the old man's eyesight had gone. So Jacob puts animal fur on his arms in order to impersonate his hairy brother. You might say this was one of the earliest cases of identity theft. Jacob is stealing the identity of his brother, Esau, the hairy one. After his deception, Jacob has to flee for his life from the anger of his brother. And he settles down in a place called Haran, taking on work there as a shepherd for Rebekah's brother, Laban, so Jacob's uncle. Because of these events, because of how Jacob tricked his father, the word Jacob would later become also a Hebrew idiom for deceiver or trickster. Try having your first day at your new job and introducing yourself with that name. We read in Genesis 31 that 20 years after Jacob fled from his home, God tells him to return to his homeland. And so with his wives, his children, his servants, flocks and herds, and all his belongings, Jacob is returning home again. That is the context for our story today, and it is on this homeward journey that we join Jacob in chapter 32. Early in the morning, Laban got up, kissed his sons and daughters, and blessed them. He then returned to his own place. Jacob also went on his way, and the angels of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, "This is the camp of God." So he named the place Mahanaim, meaning 2 camps. So as he is traveling from the land of Haran back to his homeland, with his large company of family, servants, animals, Jacob is keenly aware of the potential threat that lies ahead of him. The threat being his betrayed brother. Jacob has no idea where Esau's mind is at, if he's still murderously angry. Time, after all, doesn't heal all wounds. And so, not wishing to take his brother by surprise, Jacob sends messengers ahead of him to the country of Edom, where Esau resides. Verse 4, he instructed them, that is, the messengers, "This is what you are to say to my lord Esau. Your servant Jacob says, I have been staying with Laban and have remained there till now. I have cattle and donkeys, sheep and goats, male and female servants. Now I am sending this message to my lord, that I may find favor in your eyes." Jacob is again seeking favor, seeking a blessing. This time he's not using trickery to obtain it, but sending servants ahead of him to get it. When the messengers returned to Jacob, they said, "We went to your brother Esau, and now he is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him." One way to send a message is by using words. Another is to come towards another person together with 400 men. If you've wronged your sibling and keep your distance for fear of their reaction, and then you send them a text message to check if they're really mad, and instead of replying, you see from a distance that they come marching towards you together with 400 men, I think it's safe to say they're still a touch upset about you breaking their favorite toy. And so understandably, Jacob now enters into survival mode. He divides all the people with him into 2 groups. His thinking is that if Esau and his small army attacks one group, the other may be able to escape with their lives. It's safe to say that that night, Jacob didn't get much sleep. Verse 9, Then Jacob prayed, O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, Lord, you said to me, go back to your country and your relatives, and I will make you prosper. I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you have shown your servant. I had only my staff when I crossed this Jordan, but now I have become 2 camps. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid he will come and attack me, and also the mothers with their children. But you have said, I will surely make you prosper, and I will make your descendants like the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted. After having sent the succession of gifts ahead of them, and dividing the people into 2, Jacob spends the night in camp. He is with those closest to him, his wives and children for a while, before sending them across the stream of the river Jabbok. In verse 24 we read, So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. This verse, verse 24, seems like such a, oh, by the way, a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When reading the text, it almost feels like someone has cut and pasted this statement randomly into the story. Jacob is riddled with anxiety, fearing for his life and the lives of his family. He can't sleep. He goes to be alone, thinking, how can I survive my furious brother? And now some random man, who remains nameless and unidentified, just happens to wrestle with him till dawn. Verse 25. When the man saw that he did not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, Let me go, for it is daybreak. But Jacob replied, I will not let you go unless you bless me. The man asked him, What is your name? Jacob, he answered. Then the man said, Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome. Jacob said, Please tell me your name. But the man replied, Why do you ask my name? Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared. The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Jacob goes on from that place, on to meet his brother on the road. As he approaches Esau, he bows to him 7 times, and the text says, But Esau ran to Jacob and embraced him. He threw his arms round his neck and kissed him, and they wept. The story ends well, concluding by the reuniting of these 2 brothers. Jacob is received by Esau's hairy hug, and after 20 years apart, Esau forgives his brother, and they are at peace with each other. Now, the story of Jacob wrestling with the stranger in the night may, as we said, seem like a strange detail, an odd cut-and-paste moment that seems out of place or random or even intrusive in this story. But if you go on to read the rest of the Bible, this event becomes very significant. Why? Because after the wrestling, Jacob is given a new name, a name we might be very familiar with, the name of Israel. Israel means wrestles with God, or some translate it as he who struggles with God. Similarly to English, in Hebrew the words for strive, struggle, wrestle can be used interchangeably. And considering the significance of names in this historical context during this time, the change of someone's name should grab our attention as readers. Because as we said at the beginning, a name was considered a statement of a person's identity. A name meant something. And so here in Genesis, this isn't just an arbitrary change of a name, it signified the change of an identity, and that change served as a statement. In verse 29, Jacob asks for the man's name. He asks this stranger to introduce himself, identify himself, but the man replies, "Why do you ask my name?" And we're told, then he blessed Jacob. Notice, the stranger doesn't reply to Jacob, "No, I won't tell you my name." Instead, he asks, "Why do you ask for my name?" Almost as though Jacob should already know. It seems this stranger in the night chooses to let his actions identify him. So what are his actions in this scene? Well, number 1, he wrestles with Jacob. Number 2, he blesses Jacob. And number 3, he renames Jacob. Quite strikingly, this stranger takes on himself the right to give Jacob a new identity, the right which would usually be reserved for a parent. And interestingly enough, this identity, this new name, is rooted in the fact that he wrestled him. There's a very common misunderstanding about this story of Jacob wrestling the stranger that night. The misunderstanding has to do with the order of events. It is often assumed that the order of events in this narrative is 1. Jacob asks for a blessing, 2. The man turns away, 3. Then Jacob wrestles the man for a blessing, and 4. Finally, after a night of wrestling, the man grants Jacob a blessing. But is that what the text says? Let's have a look at it again, chapter 32. Verse 22 to 23, Jacob sends his family across the river so he can be alone. Next, Jacob is alone and he wrestles with a man till daybreak. Then the man touches Jacob's hip. Then the man says, "Let me go." Then only now does Jacob ask for a blessing. So interpreting this story as saying Jacob earned a blessing or fought his way to a blessing that night by wrestling this stranger simply doesn't reflect the text. This isn't what happened. Jacob clearly didn't know who he was wrestling, demonstrated in verse 29 when he asks the man, "What is your name?" But if you're Jacob, in a state of fear and heightened responses, and a stranger happens upon you in the dark while you're alone at night, it's not surprising that your fight reflex kicks in. Jacob might have thought it was Esau who had found him in the darkness, or a stranger who wished him harm. And we don't think clearly when we're afraid or in a state of crisis. So if that's not what happened, if Jacob didn't know who he was wrestling and wasn't fighting in order to earn a blessing, then what does happen in this story? Well, let's have a look. We said that in verse 25, the man touches Jacob's hip so that it's wrenched. Verse 26, the man says, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." And Jacob replies, "I will not go unless you bless me." The man asks, "What is your name?" Jacob, he answers, and then the man renames Jacob as Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome. Jacob then asks, "What is your name?" The man says, "Why do you ask my name?" And then he blessed him there. And verse 30 says, "So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, 'It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared.'" Now that we've read the correct order of events, what can we conclude about this story? Well, first of all, the blessing given to Jacob doesn't come as a prize earned at the end of a wrestling match. Instead, Jacob receives a blessing simply because he asks for one. He just asks, and the man gives it freely. Secondly, although Jacob may have been in doubt about who it was he was wrestling with earlier that night, after the stranger blesses him, verse 20 says that Jacob renames the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." In Hebrew, the word Penuel means face of God. Jacob no longer seems to be in question about who the stranger is. He recognizes him as the God of his father Isaac and of his grandfather Abraham, the God who spoke to him and has been leading him. The stranger's free gift of a blessing is the thing that identified him to Jacob. And thirdly, we are told something very significant concerning Jacob's name change. As we mentioned, the change of Jacob's name would be interpreted as and signify an identity change. There are themes running through the story of Jacob and his larger family. And one major theme is the theme of deception. Jacob deceived his father Isaac in order to steal a blessing from him, but Jacob wasn't the only deceptive character in this narrative. It seemed to run in the family. His mother prompted him to deceive his father. Later on, Laban, his uncle, deceives him to the point of causing Jacob to marry the wrong woman. Laban even changes Jacob's wages 10 times. And even one of Jacob's wives, Rachel, acts deceptively by stealing from her father as they left Haran and then lies about it when asked. It seems that deception, dishonesty, trickery, playing games was very much a part of the identity of this particular family. And this identity of deception is perhaps epitomized in none other than he who was named Jacob, he who grasps the heel, the deceiver, the trickster. But when God gives Jacob a new name, he is calling Jacob out of that pattern, out of that identity. He is offering him an alternative way of living life. In this story, there seems to be two different identities at war with each other, two opposing ways of living. One is deception, trickery, avoidance, acting in the shadows, pretending to be something or someone else. The other identity is illustrated as a wrestling match, a struggle. Now the name of Israel would go on to be the very name used for God's people, both literally and symbolically. Israel, the people of Israel, the children of Israel. Why? Why would God choose such a name to set the tone for the identity he gives those who follow him and his relationship with them? Surely it would be better to choose a brighter, more optimistic name, a name which meant they who are pure, or the favored ones, or those faithful to God. But struggle? Wrestling? Did God choose the name because he desires animosity or conflict? Is it because he wants people to struggle? Or because struggle in itself is good or earns good things? Or could it be that struggling with God is an antithesis to deception and dishonesty? Not because God desires us to struggle, but because we do struggle. Struggling with God and with humans is what we do as people. If we are honest, this is the description of our experience as human beings. And just as God was calling Jacob away from his familial pattern of deception, so this new identity calls to others, calls to his people, calling us into a new way, being honest. Honest about ourselves, about our hearts, our failings, our doubts, our relationships, our decisions, our faith. And this new way leads to honesty about what it looks like to follow God. It looks like struggling with God and struggling with humans. Not because God designs struggle or wants it, but because we do struggle. And Him being willing to show up in the darkness, in the night, and engage with us, wrestle with us, sends an important message that He isn't shying away from our inner conflicts. He doesn't reject or avoid our complexity. And that in this honest, raw, difficult, messy, broken, very human place, He invites us to relationship with Him and blesses freely. Now, what does this mean for us? Well, if struggling with God is the name, is the identity of those who believe and follow Him, we must ask ourselves, how are we relating to this identity? How do we deal with the presence of struggle in church, in our families, in our communities? The truth is, we often have a problem with struggle, especially when it comes to struggling with God and faith. It's one thing to have a hard life, to struggle with the people around you, with money, with circumstances, with health, but with God? In religious settings, we more often than not get uncomfortable. At the first sign of doubt, questions, struggling with faith, we look for fixes. We are quicker to give answers than to ask questions. We aren't good at allowing others to ask questions and let them simply be questions. We don't like confusion. We don't like hearing about others struggling with God. We are quick to preach and slow to listen. When another person shares their doubts, their struggles with faith, we shift nervously in our seat. We might even take on ourselves the role of struggle vanquisher. Put out that fire quick or it will spread, we say. Worse still, sometimes those who struggle with God are seen to harbor secret sins or to be asking for it somehow. We chalk it up to that they're not praying hard enough, they're not reading their Bible enough, they don't have enough faith or strength of character. Those who struggle with God, with the Bible, with the big questions, are often painted as antagonistic, rebellious, spiritually blind, and misguided. O ye of little faith, we cry, as we attempt to lecture them back into the embrace of God. We are often uncomfortable with the presence of struggle. And the only time we seem comfortable with it is if it's the right sort of struggle. For example, someone is welcome to say, "The devil is attacking me," but not, "God is silent in my life and I'm angry with him." It seems acceptable to say, "The Lord is testing me," but not, "I don't feel like I can trust him. I don't know what to think. I feel like I can't pray. I feel so lost." Religious voices often treat such people like they have the bubonic plague and that they need to be scrubbed with the brush of sound teaching, washed with the water of good preaching, and dried down with the towel of pacifying before they're released back into the flock, clean and sparkling and ready to function as they should. We are often comfortable with people sharing their difficulties as long as it looks clean and pretty, as long as it ends with platitudes like, "But God is always good," as long as you can clearly tie off the loose strings and there's a clear sense of absolution. And to force this closure, we often offer stiff formulas to complex questions and recite insipid lessons and dogma in the face of very real and very understandable and discerning struggle. But in the face of all we might do, what is God doing? How is He willing to approach Jacob in the night? How does He react to people who are wrestling, struggling? He meets us where we are, in the imperfection, in the mess. He is not put off. He is not threatened. In the midst of our struggle, He honestly faces it together with us. He gives it a name. He shows up in person and is willing to wrestle and struggle with us. And then He blesses and helps. The very people who in a church setting are deemed the undesirable, the unacceptable, the weak, and those far from God, God Himself calls His own. The strugglers which we punish for not falling in line with the narrative we're forcing, God blesses. If we, in this complex, gut-wrenching, difficult, painful time and place, are unwilling to be honest about our struggles in relating to God, then we are simply falling back to our old name. It is when we deny the presence of struggle that we return to our old name. We become once more the dishonest, the pretenders, the tricksters, those who force smiles, those who pretend in order to appear holy, and offensively turn away or put down those who don't have it all together. Because we want to look good, or because we feel threatened by realness. A Christian songwriter called Plum sings a song called "Fight for You," in which the chorus line goes, "I'm going to fight for you, even if I have to fight with you. That's what you've got to do when you love someone." To those who are trying to be honest, who are seeking, asking questions, sitting with the doubt or the anger and sadness, there is one who is willing to fight with you, to fight for you. Dare to believe that God is strong enough to handle all of it. True faith is not a porcelain vase we must try not to break. Trust is only possible when we experience honest relationship. An honest relationship is not pretending. The God of Jacob offers us today and every day another identity. And this identity is a real one, honest and genuine. And whatever struggle may look like to you, there is one who is humble enough to approach you where you are. Why is it that we think of struggle as a sign of a lack of faith, when those called God's people have struggle written into their name? Israel, what's in your name? To conclude this thought, we'll be sharing a song called Father Jacob. You may recognize part of the melody. Feel free to sing along.
Oh, the nights of dark despair. Father Jacob, once a fraud, struggles for a blessing, wrestles God. So this stranger wrestled him, hours of a desperate grip, but unable to overpower him, the stranger simply touched his hip. Father Jacob, once a fraud, struggles for a blessing, wrestles God. Why is it that we think of struggle as a sign of a lack of faith, when the people called to be God's treasure have struggle written into their name? Father Jacob, once a fraud, struggles for a blessing, wrestles God. Father Jacob, once a fraud, struggles for a blessing, Israel.
God, you who blessed Jacob, please assure us once again that struggling with you won't make you turn away from us or give up on us. Thank you for inviting honest relationship, even though it sometimes scares us and even downright seems sacrilegious, because we've been conditioned to believing that those who follow you must look in a certain way, or have it together, or even feel certain ways, when the truth is none of us can really live up to that. And perhaps there are people here today who have felt the burden of pretending that they can. Maybe some of us may even feel desperately in want of dropping the act or finding a space where we're not judged for it. So I want to pray for everyone who's joined us today. You see what we're struggling with. Perhaps some of us are enraged at you. Perhaps we're so disappointed we don't even know how to ever hope for anything again. Perhaps we're riddled with questions, or feeling empty or disillusioned. Surprise us once more with the distance you'll go with us, the depths which you will plunge to with us. Let us find relief in the name you call us, relief because it means you already know. You already know what we're struggling with, both with you and with other human beings. And we don't have to pretend with you. Please let us make space and safety for others. Let them find relief when talking to us about things in their lives that may be less than perfect or even incredibly messy and heavy. Stop us from hurting them further by lecturing when we should just listen, or condemning when we should show compassion. Let every person here experience your shalom and your presence in a special and personal and close way today and during this week. Please come and meet us in the darkness. Let it be so. Let's sing together the song called Big Enough.
Is not God big enough to receive the doubt in us? Can't His presence room all human pain? Is not truth true enough to survive the lies in us? So whatever you may bring, God is big enough. Is not God big enough to receive the fear in us? Can't His heart accept a stumbling faith? Is not He strong enough to forgive the sin in us? So whatever you may bring, God is big enough. Are our questions threats to the answer Himself? Could we bring a thing to Him that would overreach His love? Is not God big enough to receive the dark in us? Can't His light envelop any shade? Is not He life enough to reverse the death in us? So whatever you may bring, God is big enough. He is big enough.
Thank you all so much for spending your valuable time with us here at Shabbat at the House today. Don't forget to join us at 7 p.m. on the 31st for our Reformation Day celebration. Looking forward to see you then.